What begins as a single, quiet moment of anticipation slowly unfolds into a storm of emotional reckoning in this latest chapter of The Bold and the Beautiful, where love, betrayal, and illusion collide with a force that none of the characters are truly prepared to withstand. Beneath the surface of everyday conversations and seemingly ordinary decisions, something far more volatile is taking shape, something that cannot be undone once it is fully revealed. The episode builds its tension not through sudden explosions, but through a slow tightening of emotional threads, each one pulling tighter around the characters until there is no space left to escape the consequences of what they have chosen, what they have hidden, and what they are now forced to confront. At the center of this unraveling stands Daphne, holding in her hands a small object that carries a weight far greater than its physical form could ever suggest. The pregnancy test is not merely a tool, but a symbol of everything she and Carter have projected onto their future, a future that feels within reach yet remains uncertain in ways neither of them fully acknowledges. Carter approaches the moment with an almost dangerous level of certainty, convinced that the result will confirm what he has already allowed himself to believe. His confidence is not just hope. It is a form of emotional investment so deep that any outcome other than the one he expects will feel like a betrayal of reality itself. Daphne, however, stands in a quieter space, where hope exists alongside fear, where the possibility of joy is shadowed by the awareness that things do not always unfold as planned. She does not say it aloud, but there is a part of her that wonders what it would mean if the result is negative, what it would say about her body, her future, and the life she has begun to imagine. This moment, fragile and suspended in time, exists in stark contrast to the chaos unfolding elsewhere, yet it is no less intense. Because whether the result is positive or negative, the emotional consequences will ripple outward, shaping not only their relationship, but the way they see themselves. If the result confirms their hopes, it will not bring immediate peace, but rather a new kind of anxiety, one rooted in the fear of losing something that has not yet fully become real. If it shatters those hopes, it will force them into a confrontation with vulnerability they are not prepared to face, raising questions that cannot be easily answered and wounds that may not heal quickly. In this way, the pregnancy test becomes a pivot point, a quiet but powerful force that anchors one of the episode's most emotionally complex storylines. Meanwhile, far from that fragile moment of possibility, a far more dangerous confrontation is taking shape between Sheila and Taylor, one that carries with it the weight of history, resentment, and unresolved truths. Sheila does not enter this confrontation as a woman seeking clarity, but as someone demanding it, someone who has already sensed that something is wrong and is no longer willing to accept half-answers or polite deflections. The tension between them is immediate and palpable, not because of what is said at first, but because of what has been left unsaid for far too long. Taylor, who has always relied on composure and reason, finds herself caught in a situation where those tools begin to fail her, because this is not a conflict that can be managed through logic alone. Sheila's questions cut through the surface of the situation with unsettling precision, exposing inconsistencies that Taylor cannot easily dismiss. The small details begin to matter in ways they never did before: the timing of a pizza delivery that never arrived, the presence of sand on Deacon's shoes, the subtle clues that suggest a hidden truth waiting to be uncovered. Sheila is not guessing. She is observing, piecing together a narrative that leads her toward a conclusion she may not have been ready to face, yet cannot ignore. When she finally voices her suspicion, it is not tentative, but sharp and direct, forcing Taylor into a position where denial is no longer sustainable. The moment of confession that follows does not arrive as an explosive declaration, but as something quieter, heavier, more devastating in its certainty. Taylor admits that she is involved with Deacon, but not in the way Sheila initially frames it. There was no betrayal in the conventional sense, no secret affair conducted in the shadows while pretending innocence. Instead, there is something far more complicated and, in some ways, more threatening, an emotional truth that cannot be dismissed as a mistake. Taylor insists that what exists between her and Deacon is real, that it is not born from impulse or weakness, but from something deeper, something they have both chosen to acknowledge despite the consequences. For Sheila, this distinction does not soften the blow, it intensifies it. Because if it were merely an affair, it could be dismissed as a lapse in judgment, something that could be condemned and perhaps forgiven in time. But love is different. Love suggests intention, commitment, a willingness to dismantle existing bonds in order to build something new. And that is what makes Taylor's confession unbearable, because it reframes the situation entirely. Sheila is no longer confronting a betrayal that can be corrected, but a reality that threatens to erase her place in Deacon's life altogether. Her reaction is not immediate chaos, but something far more unsettling, a pause, a moment of internal recalibration where emotion and control collide. Sheila turns away, takes a breath, and then returns, her demeanor shifting in a way that suggests she is actively choosing how to respond. This is not the reckless, impulsive woman of the past, but neither is it someone who has fully transcended that past. There is a tension in her restraint, a sense that the line between control and collapse is thinner than she would like to admit. And then there is the knife. The pizza cutter, ordinary in its design, becomes something symbolic in her hands, a reflection not just of potential violence, but of the identity she is struggling to leave behind. As she looks at her reflection in its surface, the moment takes on a surreal quality, blurring the line between thought and action, between imagination and reality. What follows is not entirely clear, deliberately so. The image of Sheila attacking Taylor, of crossing that line once again, appears almost like a vision, a manifestation of what could happen rather than what definitively does. It is this ambiguity that makes the moment so powerful, because it forces the audience and the characters alike to question what is real and what exists only in the realm of possibility. Taylor, regardless of whether she is physically harmed, is left shaken in a way that cannot be easily dismissed. The threat, whether acted upon or not, has already done its damage. It has exposed the fragility of her situation, the danger inherent in the choices she has made, and the reality that she is now entangled in a conflict that cannot be resolved through apology alone. Her repeated attempts to express regret only serve to deepen Sheila's anger because they highlight a fundamental misunderstanding. Taylor believes that acknowledging the pain she has caused will help to mitigate it, but for Sheila, those apologies feel hollow, insufficient in the face of what has been taken from her. Elsewhere, the emotional fallout begins to spread, reaching Hope, whose reaction is driven not by direct involvement in the confrontation, but by the ripple effects of everything that is unfolding. When she rushes into Il Giardino to check on Deacon, her urgency reflects a deeper anxiety, one rooted in the understanding that nothing in her world is as stable as it once seemed. Hope is not just worried about a single incident. She is reacting to a pattern, a growing sense that the people she loves are becoming entangled in situations that could spiral out of control at any moment. Deacon, for his part, attempts to maintain a sense of normalcy, insisting that everything is fine, that there is no immediate danger. But his reassurances lack conviction, undermined by his own awareness of the precarious position he is in. He admits that Steffi is aware of the situation and has already set boundaries, a detail that adds another layer of tension because it suggests that the consequences of his actions are already beginning to take shape in ways he cannot fully control. Steffi's perspective introduces yet another dimension to the unfolding drama, one shaped by her protective instincts and her willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. When she recounts the near incident between Deacon and Taylor to Finn, her anger is not just about what happened, but about what it represents. She sees Deacon not as a victim of circumstance, but as someone who has taken advantage of a vulnerable situation, someone whose actions have put others at risk. Finn, ever the voice of measured reasoning, attempts to contextualize the situation, to remind Steffi that the dynamics are more complex than they appear. But even his logic cannot fully counter the emotional force of Steffi's perspective, because this is not just about facts, but about perception, about the way events are interpreted and the judgments that follow. As these storylines continue to unfold, they begin to intersect in subtle but significant ways, each one contributing to a broader narrative about the consequences of choice and the fragile nature of the lives these characters have built. The pregnancy test, the confrontation, the confession, the fear, the anger. All of these elements are connected by a shared theme, the idea that the truth, once revealed, cannot be contained. It does not remain confined to a single moment or a single relationship. It spreads, affecting everyone in its path, reshaping dynamics, altering perceptions, and forcing each character to confront aspects of themselves they may have preferred to ignore. In this way, the episode becomes more than just a sequence of dramatic events. It becomes a study in emotional cause and effect, in the way small decisions can lead to profound consequences, and in the way individuals respond when the realities they have constructed begin to fall apart. There are no easy resolutions here, no clear distinctions between right and wrong, only a series of choices that lead to outcomes no one can fully predict. And as each character moves forward, carrying the weight of those choices, the story sets the stage for what comes next, not as a continuation of what has already happened, but as an escalation, a deepening of the tensions that have only just begun to surface. What remains most compelling is not the question of what will happen, but how each character will endure what is coming. Because in a world where love can become betrayal, where hope can turn into fear, and where control is always just one moment away from collapse, survival is not just about avoiding disaster, but about facing it, understanding it, and finding a way to move forward even when nothing feels certain anymore. What unfolds beneath the polished surface of that April 7th episode of The Bold and the Beautiful is not a single confrontation, but a carefully layered emotional collapse in slow motion, where every character stands at the edge of something they can no longer fully control, and where the illusion of stability begins to fracture under the quiet pressure of buried fears, unresolved guilt, and dangerous desires that refuse to stay hidden any longer. The tension between Taylor and Sheila is not merely about a physical threat, nor is it about a single moment of violence that can be easily explained or dismissed. It is something far more unsettling because it exists in that ambiguous space between what appears to have happened and what actually did, a space where perception becomes unreliable and where even the audience is forced to question whether they have witnessed truth or manipulation. The image of Sheila lunging with a pizza cutter lingers not because of the act itself, but because of what it represents, the lingering shadow of who Sheila used to be, the version of her that no one can fully forget, no matter how much she insists she has changed. Yet the narrative quickly begins to dismantle that expectation, revealing that Taylor emerges physically unharmed, forcing a reevaluation of everything that came before. This is where the story becomes psychologically charged rather than purely dramatic, because the danger is no longer rooted in physical injury, but in emotional destabilization. Taylor, who has always positioned herself as someone grounded in logic and emotional clarity, now finds herself unsettled in a way she cannot easily rationalize. The fact that nothing truly happened only makes it worse. If Sheila did not attack her, then why did it feel so real? And if it felt real, then what does that say about the fragile boundary between fear and reality that Taylor has always believed she could control? This is the quiet brilliance of the misdirection. By allowing the audience and the characters to believe, even briefly, that violence has occurred, the story exposes how deeply Sheila's past still infects the present. It does not matter whether she acted or not. What matters is that everyone believes she could. And that belief is enough to destabilize everything around her. Sheila, for her part, stands at a crossroads that is far more complex than a simple redemption arc. Her insistence that she is no longer the unhinged woman she once was is not entirely false, but it is also not entirely convincing. There is a tension in her restraint, a sense that her control is something she must actively maintain rather than something that comes naturally. When she pulls back from the edge, it is not a moment of peace, but a moment of calculation, as though she understands that losing control now would cost her everything she has fought to rebuild. Taylor senses this, even if she cannot articulate it. Her unease does not come from what Sheila did, but from what Sheila might still be capable of doing. That lingering uncertainty becomes its own form of psychological torment, one that follows Taylor beyond the office and into every quiet moment where she is left alone with her thoughts. It is not the threat of immediate danger that haunts her, but the realization that she may never truly feel safe as long as Sheila exists within her orbit. This internal conflict begins to erode Taylor's sense of stability, forcing her into a defensive emotional posture that begins to affect her interactions with others, even those she trusts. Meanwhile, Sheila's trajectory shifts toward Deacon, and this confrontation carries a different kind of tension, one rooted not in fear but in betrayal and resentment. Sheila's anger toward Deacon is layered, complicated by the fact that her expectations of him were never entirely realistic to begin with. She wanted loyalty, perhaps even devotion, from a man whose own emotional landscape is defined by inconsistency and self-interest. Deacon's infidelity becomes less of a shocking revelation and more of an inevitable outcome, yet that does not lessen the sting for Sheila. What makes this dynamic compelling is that Sheila does not completely lose control in this moment. Instead, she recalibrates. Her confrontation with Deacon is sharp, pointed, but ultimately restrained, suggesting that she is learning to navigate her emotions in a way that aligns with the version of herself she is trying to become. However, restraint does not equal resolution. The tension between them remains unresolved, simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the next moment of weakness or provocation. Sheila's decision not to push things too far is not necessarily a sign of growth, but rather a strategic pause. She understands that if she is to maintain any semblance of stability, she must choose her battles carefully. Deacon, on the other hand, is left in a precarious position, caught between guilt and self-preservation, unsure of how far Sheila might go if pushed too far. Their relationship becomes a fragile balancing act, one that could collapse at any moment under the weight of their unresolved issues. Parallel to this emotional battlefield is the quieter, yet equally significant, storyline involving Carter and Daphne. At first glance, their situation appears to offer a contrast to the chaos unfolding elsewhere, a more hopeful narrative centered on the possibility of new life and shared happiness. But even here, the story refuses to remain simple. The anticipation surrounding Daphne's pregnancy test is not just about the result itself, but about what that result represents for both of them. For Carter, it is a moment of certainty, a belief that things will go as expected, that life will reward him with the future he has envisioned. This confidence, however, carries with it an undercurrent of vulnerability, because the more certain he is, the more devastating any deviation from that expectation will become. Daphne's perspective is more complex, shaped by a quieter, more introspective form of hope that is intertwined with fear. The possibility that the test could be negative introduces a different kind of tension, one that forces her to confront questions about her own body, her own limitations, and the possibility that something may be wrong in a way that cannot be easily fixed. The idea of undiagnosed infertility lingers as an unspoken fear, one that threatens to redefine not only her future, but her sense of self. In a world where relationships are often tested by external forces, this introduces an internal conflict that is far more difficult to navigate because it cannot be confronted through confrontation or resolution. It must be endured. And yet, the narrative does not allow even a positive outcome to remain untouched by uncertainty. If the test results come back as they hope, that hope itself becomes a new source of tension. The possibility of loss looms over any early joy, creating a fragile emotional state where happiness is tempered by the fear of what could be taken away. This duality transforms what should be a moment of celebration into something far more complicated, where every step forward is accompanied by the awareness that everything could collapse without warning. What binds these storylines together is not just the events themselves, but the emotional architecture that supports them. Each character is navigating a version of uncertainty that challenges their understanding of themselves and their relationships. Taylor grapples with fear that cannot be rationalized. Sheila struggles with control that may not be sustainable. Deacon faces the consequences of choices he cannot undo, and Carter and Daphne stand at the threshold of a future that is as fragile as it is promising. The episode becomes a study in tension not as a series of explosive moments, but as a sustained emotional pressure that builds quietly, relentlessly, until something inevitably gives way. In this way, the April 7th episode does not rely on shock value alone. Instead, it constructs a narrative where the true drama lies in what is not fully resolved, in the spaces between actions, in the lingering questions that refuse to be answered. It is a reminder that in a world like this, the most dangerous moments are not always the ones that explode into violence, but the ones that leave behind uncertainty, because uncertainty has a way of growing, of spreading, of reshaping everything it touches. And as each character moves forward, carrying their own version of that uncertainty, the story sets the stage for conflicts that will not only test their relationships, but redefine who.
Oh,